Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Her Excellency Kolinda Grabar Kitarović of the Republic of Croatia and the Right Honorable Tony Blair of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. We will be discussing today the role of technology infrastructure in transforming future governance within the evolving global agenda in Europe and beyond. And today, to discuss these issues, I'm joined by the former UK Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Tony Blair, Executive Chairman of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, a not-for-profit organization founded on the belief that a country's success and ability to enact transformation change is dependent on the effectiveness of its leadership and governance. And creating real change means strategy, policy, and delivering, with technology being enabler of all three. Now, with my experience in government so far, I must say, through different capacities, including being president of Croatia, we always treated digitalization as sort of a department in itself, stovepiping, creating e-government. But what you talk about is that the real issue is how we harness the power of technology to revolutionize the way governments serve its citizens. And you talk about the 21st century strategic state. Can you please explain a little bit the concept, its main elements, and perhaps give us a few examples of what you mean?
Yeah, sure. And Kolinda, first of all, thank you very much for being part of this conversation, and it's great to be back at Concordia again. Look, my view is very simple. If you think about the biggest real world event today, I mean, leave aside all the geopolitics and the usual stuff, it's the technology revolution. And that revolution now is in, I think, a kind of reinforcement loop of permanent momentum. Okay, so you've got a whole set of things that have come together around, most recently, generative artificial intelligence. And this is just going to change the way the whole world works. And the thing about politics is that politicians, I mean, I'll leave you aside from this. Anyway,
thank you.
I was only a prime minister.
I don't consider myself to be a politician. It's either career diplomat or, when I'm in office, rather being a leader, thinking of next generations and of the next elections.
Well, that's very noble.
Thank you.
But I was just a mere prime minister. You were a president, so there you are. You're going to be slightly grander. So the thing is, because politicians, often the change makers and the policy makers, live in different worlds and don't mix a lot together, the politicians, I think, find the technology revolution difficult to handle for perfectly understandable reasons. But when you look at, for example, how the private sector is developing today, I mean, that is the central question for them. How do they deal with this revolution? And I think just as the 20th century state really grew out of the Industrial Revolution, right, because the 19th century state was a small one, the 20th century state grew to be much bigger, I think you're going to find in the 21st century that you're going to have to reshape the state completely. And the way that government works, just in the same way that the way the private sector works, is going to be completely transformed by this technology. And therefore, if you don't understand its implications, then it's hard to master it. And if you don't master it, you can't harness it. And yet it offers both enormous opportunity, but huge risks. And therefore, for me, the central purpose for a government today is to say, well, what does it mean for us? How do we reshape for example, our public services? Obviously, the private sector is going to be completely reshaped by it. How does government handle this? So this is the mission. But the problem is that, as I say, the politicians often find, when I'm talking to politicians about technology, they kind of say, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, now let's talk about politics. And I'm saying, no, this is actually central to the political mission.
Yes, and you're right in that, because politicians really tend to be slow in changing. And sometimes in taking decisions, being too afraid of taking the wrong decision. And you mentioned harnessing that technology. I think that is the issue of the day. with the galloping speed at which generative artificial intelligence is developing and other emerging and disruptive technologies that can be, as you pointed out, that can be used for purposes of development and put to good use, but can also be used by both state and non-state actors for very destructive purposes, beginning with disinformation campaigns, malicious intent, but also creating weapons, autonomous weapons, that if we are not careful, at one point can get a mind of their own. You know, sometimes I think of the movie Terminator, whether it was predicting the future in a way. So how do we find common agreement? Because to me, it seems that technological development today is still, or harnessing technology is still very much dominated by geopolitical concerns and the risks, and geopolitical competition, access to technological development. The chips, the semiconductors, etc. But obviously, we will have to regulate in some way or another how these technologies are used in order for them not to be misused. So many questions here. What kind of body would, at what level? Obviously, to me, it implies cooperation between countries who today are competitors in that, the US, China, the EU, etc., at the global level. But have we at all defined what the challenges are, what the issues are, and how to go ahead about regulating that space?
Well, part of the challenge is that the technology itself is developing very fast. And so someone likened generative AI to me. At the moment, it's like someone with a very average IQ, but with 300,000 years worth of experience. In other words, you've got the accumulated experience at your fingertips, but an average intelligence. But he said to me that this is someone heavily involved in this, the next iterations of generative AI will be like someone with an IQ of 150 or maybe 200 and 300,000 years of experience. So this is going to be changing at a rate that I think, you know, the risk if you try and regulate at this moment in time to cover every different dimension is that you end up just, you know, being out of date very quickly or making a mistake in regulation.
Are we already too late?
No, I don't think we're too late, but I think you do have to distinguish between two separate things. One are what you do as a government to access the opportunities of this, because I do believe, for example, in healthcare, it offers us the opportunity to switch from a healthcare system that's based on curing people when they're sick to one that is preventing ill health and based on well-being. Likewise, I think you could change the whole way. You know, I saw some fascinating things about use of AI in education and how you can personalize education. I think the whole set of processes within government that can be automated. So that's one set of things is, you know, what you do to reshape the way that government operates as a result of the potential of AI. But then, as you rightly say, the other question is, well, how do you regulate the difficulties? Now, the thing about politicians is, you know, regulation, they kind of get that. You know, they like that. They feel at home when you're talking about regulation. But the problem is, you're going to end up in a situation where there'll be different regulatory frameworks, and you know, you're going to have to see how you can try and pull countries together. For example, in my view, it would be very sensible for the Americans and the Europeans to cooperate on what might be the right regulatory framework. And you're going to have to recognize that this framework is going to require constant adjustment. And on the risk side, you know, I think eventually you will get to the stage where the world decides it's got to put some guardrails around this, because this technology is so powerful, and it is general purpose technology, and therefore it can be used for bad as well as good. So I think we're only at the beginning stages of this, and I guess my biggest plea right at this moment is for political leaders at least to understand what is happening. And you know, it is hard for, look, it's hard for political leaders, it's hard for people, frankly, of an older generation. I mean, I struggle with the technology myself. Yeah, obviously here it does as well.
Us.
But
Not us.
no, I was asked just a few months ago. I was asked to go and give a speech on cryptocurrency. Okay, so I don't know a lot about cryptocurrency, so I decided to ask my oldest son, who's in the technology business, to tell me about cryptocurrency so I could address this conference authoritatively. So anyway, he explained it to me, and I said, I don't understand it. So he then sent me something called The Idiot's Guide to Cryptocurrency. And obviously I have attained a higher level of idiocy, so I didn't understand that either. And finally, on the morning of the speech, I phoned him and say, so I'm about to address them, what do I say? He says, tell them you're sick. So I understand why it's really hard for political leaders, but they need to get their heads around it. I think, for example, you need a completely different skill set coming into government. Again, if I was back in government today, I would be making sure that I was reshaping the center of government so that I had people working alongside me who actually understand this revolution, can give me at least some guidance as to the things I should be thinking about, including how you combine with others to regulate it sensibly.
Absolutely, and speaking about generative AI, you've mentioned the health sector. Just using generative AI in order to be able to diagnose diseases, etc., or putting it to use in, for instance, one of the things that I'm doing right now is co-chairing the Global Monitoring Board for Pandemic Preparedness.
Right.
So in that sense, we would very much need the data to be analyzed and put together so that we can create the appropriate lessons learned in order how to prevent, prepare for, and respond to future pandemics and health emergencies. But I'm also thinking about the power of generative AI that scares me, that pertains to information space and disinformation space. Going back to the pandemic, there were so many conspiracy theories, but we also see hybrid activities in interference in different societies, different values, elections, etc. And when I think about myself as a woman in politics, of course, when people tell me I Googled you, I usually say all of those photos of me wearing a bikini, not me. So, and that was before generative AI. Imagine what they can do to us with such technology. So, how do we regulate that? But also having in mind that most innovation and the impetus comes from the private sector. So obviously we need to talk to the private sector as well. We need to talk to the citizens, as the power of digitalization also means inclusion of every single citizen to be involved in the process, to be able to benefit from a digital state or digital governance. And we still know there is a lot of fear out there because people have resistance to change, or they don't know how to use digital devices and technologies, etc. So the problem becomes compounded on how to go ahead with regulation, but without stopping progress and without being overly restrictive towards innovation. So how do you see the way forward there? Are we still looking at generative AI and emerging and disruptive technologies that come with it as sort of a technological Cold War being waged on who's going to make more progress? Or are we figuring into all of this, the common purpose and the common goals that we want to achieve?
Yeah, I think so. On the misinformation, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's going to be huge opportunities to disrupt elections, to do, deep fakes and so on. I think this will become a huge question. Europe, as you know, has got a regulatory framework that it's putting forward at the moment. America is starting the first discussions about that. There's an AI summit happening in the UK in November. I think we're going to feel our way in this. I mean, I'm not sure what the answer to it is at this stage, but I am sure that you do need people to try and come together and get some common rules around it. And I think even though that there's going to be the Chinese, for example, will take a very different view on regulation and come at it from a different perspective, which will be very much about protecting the power of the state. Nonetheless, even China and other countries, unless they're engaged in massive disinformation campaigns, and unfortunately some are, there's going to be at least some common interest in trying to put some rules in place. But I think the other thing that will be really important is just to think how we carry people through this process of change when you are going to want to regulate against the harm it can do, but you don't want to stifle the innovation.
Exactly.
Because you were talking about pandemic preparedness. I mean, this technology is going to offer us the opportunity to revolutionize drug discovery, clinical research, already genomic surveillance. There are new technologies that are developing there. I mean, this gives us the opportunity to change the way global healthcare works. So I think there are bits of this puzzle that we just can't know the answer to at the moment. I guess what I'm trying to do from the point of view of my institute and the governments we work with around the world is just to say, put it front and center. This is not at the end of the day, let's have a discussion about this cute technology. This is going to be the thing that will reshape the private and public sector. So let's work out how we deal with it properly and sensibly. And then at an international level, it will require, I think, a lot of cooperation and countries being prepared to work together. And that leadership will come not just out of the countries, but these technology companies. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing if you think today that the market cap of Apple is the equivalent of, the annual GDP of France. Amazon this year will invest in research and development 4 times as much as the entire British government's research and development program. I don't think you would have got ChatGPT without a huge company being prepared to put billions and billions of dollars of investment. So one of the other things that I think we're going to have to think about is that we're in a world today where these large technology companies, I mean, whether you like it or you don't like it, leave to one side for a moment, the power of these companies, their ability to influence the world, is something I don't think I think in recent times we've not really come across. You take the power of satellite and Starlink. Look at the role it's playing in Ukraine.
I was going to mention exactly that. I mean, it's about individuals being able to control conflicts.
So you're in a situation where this is just another example of how this world is different. And what I always think is the good thing about being in government is you're in government, right? I mean, yeah. So that's, whatever any politician says about, no, it's great being out of government. No, it's best to be in the position of power. But the one thing that happens when you come out of government, and I'm sure you've found this, and you've been out of government much less long time than me, is you learn so much about the world. I mean, it's actually shocking. The single thing that's most shocking to me about having left office is just how much I've learned, which I kind of would have liked to have known when I was there, but I didn't. So there it is. But the point is you get that ability to take a step back, and therefore you see things a little more clearly, whereas when you're in government, there's 1,000, as you know, there's 1,000 things coming at you, and events and crises and scandals and all the rest of it. And I just think, for me right now, the single most important thing is to get people focused on this issue in a way that puts the change makers and the policy makers at least in some form of coherent dialogue.
Great. We have 1 minute left, down to the last minute. So let me ask you, so in closing, we've seen some attempts at regulation of the space. The Secretary General of the UN has talked about it. We've seen the White House actually come with some proposals. We've seen the European Union taking some steps towards the digital decade and the digital compass, and Ursula von der Leyen talking about it in her last State of the Union speech. Do you think we're going in the right direction?
Look, I think we're kind of going in a direction, which is better than not. But I think if you were to talk to any politician engaged in this and they were to be frank about it, they'd say we're feeling our way. Now, I think at this stage that's not unreasonable, and it's not a bad thing. But I do think the risk is that the thing moves so fast that we're trying to catch up the whole time, which is again why you need it to be absolutely central to government deliberation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And being in government, you learn so much about the world, but you also learn so much about yourself. It was lovely to spend these 20 minutes with you, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.